This episode is brought to you by Squarp, because Apax makes explaining MIDI a lot easier.
Hey everybody, there is no time to lose, because today we are going to do a speedrun of the entire Midi Standard. While the basics covered in this video will be primarily aimed at beginners, I will also include in-depth information that might be enlightening to more advanced users, and MIDI black belts are welcome to critique me in the comments and enjoy the funny pictures.
Back in the early 80s, there was no universal standard for communicating with electronic musical instruments, except for actually playing them. Yes, different approaches to analog control voltages allowed for basic interconnectivity, and there were proprietary digital formats like the Oberheim Parallel and Roland's Digital Control Bus, but no real synth Esperanto. However, in 1981, Roland boss Ikutaro Kakehashi ignited a collaboration between Japanese and American brands, and a supergroup of certified synth gods including Kakehashi himself, Dave Smith, Tom Oberheim and Bob Moog introduced MIDI to the world in the following 2 years, with the SCI Prophet 600, Roland Jupiter 6 and TR-909 being the first instruments to be equipped with the standard. A few additional bits and bobs aside, this is still the exact communication protocol we use up to this day.
MIDI is ancient, and so are many aspects of the standard, like limited cable length, a bitrate worthy of German Wi-Fi and 70s hi-fi style 5-pin connectors. Only 3 of the 5 pins are actually in use. The cables are basically one-way streets, optocouplers are used to prevent ground loops, and MIDI outs are supposed to deliver a tiny bit of power that lets you drive devices like MIDI splitters. Not all manufacturers comply to these specifications though. Speaking of, the small TRS connectors found on many modern instruments are not standardized. The 2 versions come in different polarities, and as a result, audio boomers like myself hate them with a passion. And don't get me started on Bluetooth MIDI.
USB MIDI, on the other hand, is a necessary evil. Admittedly, it is notorious for introducing ground noise. Timing of the MIDI information is not always spot on, and some pieces of gear need dedicated drivers. That being said, especially smaller setups benefit from the convenience of driverless class-compliant USB MIDI connections. As soon as your synth collection grows, one of these, itself presumably USB-based multi-port MIDI interfaces, might be more reliable and less prone to unwanted noise than a multitude of USB cables. MIDI host ports like the one on the Apax are a godsend though, as they allow you to hook up and power USB MIDI controllers directly to and from a synth or sequencer.
With that out of the way, we should focus on the inner beauty of the standard. First of all, and I'm pretty sure you've heard this one before, MIDI is not audio. Let's call it a retro-futuristic real-time version of sheet music.
A little over 10 octaves can be managed. Different manufacturers have different opinions on how to number these octaves. There are separate commands for note on and note off, and they come with information on pitch and the velocity with which you struck a key or whatever you're using to trigger a note.
Before we take a deep dive into the other ways of musical expression MIDI has to offer, we need to have a look at another integral part of the standard's architecture. While the analog CV and gate signals modular people love so much can only send 1 parameter per cable, a MIDI connection hosts up to 16 channels. It's true, you can control up to 16 different instruments independently from one MIDI output. As long as all but one of them have a Midi Thru, which is supposed to spit out an exact replica of what you send to the MIDI in. In many cases it is much recommended to use a MIDI splitter or through box though, because A, MIDI Thrus can mess with signal quality, and B, not all pieces of gear are graced by the beauty of a real MIDI trio.
Some instruments are capable of producing more than one timbre at the same time. It's like having multiple synths playing different tones in one box. We call that multitimbrality. It's not always as luxurious to handle as with the AudioPilz, which has enough tracks to discreetly address all channels, and there are no universal rules on which sound needs to be routed to which channel. But inspired by the general Midi standard we will talk about in a bit, drums tend to be on channel 10. Omni lets you address all channels, for better or worse.
Some of you might be perfectly happy with the simplicity of the note on and off messages, but Midi is also capable of transporting more complex ways of musical expression.
Midi was designed for people who can actually play, so the two most important controllers might be pitch bend for hair metal guitar imitation and reaching notes between the semitones, and Aftertouch, controlled by the pressure you apply to a key after you pressed it. Not all controllers and sound generators support Aftertouch, and we need to distinguish between the monophonic variety that controls the entire channel or sound and the deluxe polyphonic version that lets you massage parameters of every note you play individually.
Those of you who are, like me, part of the knob twiddling demographic will favor so-called MIDI control changes to these modulation possibilities you actually have to practice for.
Okay, especially MIDI CC number 1, mod wheel, is still deep in real musicians' territory, and there is a, let's call it suggestion, which controller should be used for which parameter, but your mileage may vary. In addition to remote controlling parameters of sound generators, mixing consoles, and midified air fryers, channel mode messages, which can only be sent to the oftentimes selectable basic channel of an instrument, were implemented for managing MIDI setups, for example by activating Omni mode or sending all notes off in case some synth didn't get a note off message, which happens all the time. With 128 steps, the resolution of MIDI CCs might be too coarse for some applications, first and foremost when it comes to frequency-based parameters like pitch or filter cutoff, leading to clearly audible stepping. The pitch bend message already comes with a higher resolution. There are only 128 control changes. However, a set of controllers based on a combination of CCs called RPNs and NRPNs let you drastically expand the number of parameters you can control. RPNs, or registered parameter numbers, are defined by the Midi standard. NRPNs are non-registered and differ from manufacturer to manufacturer.
Purists don't need patch memory, but we mere mortals like to switch patches, FX unit programs and guitar amp channels with program change messages. You can combine them with MIDI CC0, which acts as a bank change and lets you address a grand total of 16,384 banks. Still not enough for meme synths like Autogun. All the MIDI commands we have talked about up to this point are channel voice messages. No matter how you use them on one MIDI channel, they won't have any impact on the other 15. Additionally, the MIDI standard offers 3 groups of messages that affect the entire MIDI stream.
System common messages like MIDI timecode, song position pointer and tune request were implemented for keeping larger studios of the 80s and 90s under control and allow, among other things, for synchronization in absolute time, not the MIDI sync that musicians still tend to use. Speaking of which, MIDI sync is a system real-time message. It is absolutely essential for synchronizing two pieces of gear in a musically meaningful way. it is inherently flawed, many manufacturers still haven't found a way to implement it properly, and the 24 messages per quarter note tend to mess with the archaic bandwidth of the protocol.
Another system real-time message that has a reputation of clogging your old MIDI pipe is active sensing, which became part of the standard to battle the aforementioned stuck note. Last but certainly not least, system exclusive aka Sysex.
In order to give manufacturers a way to use MIDI in new ways without compromising the standard, they were allowed to simply send a predefined header, and as long as the transmitter and receiver adhere to the instrument's own lingo, the sky's the limit. Patch transfer, backups, MIDI machine control, it is the only way to tweak many vintage synths, and in some cases you can time-consumingly send audio data as well. People proficient in Sysex tend to be a secretive bunch, and some of my hair loss was triggered by trying to control instruments like the DX7.
The very first MIDI application was to control a synth with another synth in real time, but as most of you will know, it can be recorded, edited and stored in hardware and software form, and the majority of today's MIDI communication takes place inside of a computer. MIDI files were and are used a lot in conjunction with DOS games and karaoke machines, so the need arose to establish an extension to the standard to make sure that every compatible playback device knew what it had to do. General MIDI. The relevance of GM in today's music production is limited, but I love classic compositions like the Rise of the Triad soundtrack. For many MIDI beginners, one of the most humbling moments is the first encounter with a MIDI implementation chart. Some of these aren't worth the paper they are printed on, others give you important insights into the possibilities of a setup.
There's usually a column for what the piece of gear in question is capable of understanding, and another one for what it is willing to tell other equipment. O is good, X is bad, and additional information is always welcome. Documentation of Sysex tends to be a little more elaborate.
The introduction of MIDI in the 80s was, without a doubt, a stroke of genius, an early example of how great the idea of open source can be, and that humans are capable of achieving fantastic things when they work together regardless of cultural barriers. However, all this happened over 40 years ago, so our beloved lingua franca is in desperate need of a makeover. More specialized approaches like Electron's Turbo MIDI aside, I'm aware of two contemporary takes on the subject.
MPE, MIDI Polyphonic Expression. Introduced in 2017, MPE is based on the concept of polyphonic aftertouch and takes it to the next level. Entire MIDI channels are dedicated to single notes in order to allow for more expressive performances using instruments like the Apex, Osmos, Linstrument or Cjbeards. Midi 2.0, unveiled in 2020, version 2 has yet to pick up pace. There are a few DAWs, plugins and controllers with a promise of implementing the new standard, but I haven't found many improvements that would have a positive impact on my workflows.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a comment with ideas for further music tech speedruns. Like, subscribe, become a patron and use one of the links down below that help the channel regardless of what your gas commands you to buy. Thanks for watching and see you next time.